My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey guys, four-time U.S. Soccer Athlete of the Year, Landon Donovan here.
And I'm former U.S. and Premier League star goalkeeper Tim Howard.
And we're here to let you know about our brand new podcast, Unfiltered Soccer.
We'll be providing you with all of our insights into everything happening with the U.S. men's national team as they build towards World Cup 2026 here in North America.
And we'll give you all our thoughts on the latest news from MLS, the English Premier League, international tournaments, La Liga, everything going on in the soccer world and beyond.
And all throughout, Landon and I will be dropping in some of our most memorable stories from both on and off the pitch.
That's right. We'll take you inside the locker rooms, give you all the behind-the-scenes soccer info that you crave. It's our life in soccer, and it's unfiltered.
Subscribe to Unfiltered Soccer on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Make sure you follow us on all your social media platforms at Unfiltered Soccer.
New episodes drop every Tuesday.
What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost. Their designer quality frames start at $95, including prescription lenses, plus scratch-resistant, smudge-resistant, and anti-reflective coatings, and UV protection, and free adjustments for life. To find your next pair of glasses, sunglasses, or contact lenses, or to find the Warby Parker store nearest you, head over to warbyparker.com. That's warbyparker.com.
Good evening, sir.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, and that voice you can hear, guys, is John Spurling, the author of this wonderful book, Go to War, Football in the 80s, Football on the Brink in the 80s. John, I have to say, is that a reference to the fans, to the players, to the owners, to Falklands, or to that wonderful, iconic song, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Two Tribes Go to War?
It's to be honest with you, Paul, it's the whole lot. Yeah. I mean, as you say, Go to War is from the second line from the Frankie Goes to Hollywood song, which is set during the Cold War. Obviously, the video shows the Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev squaring up to each other. And as for Football on the Brink, I mean, that to me, it's got multiple meanings because, for those of us that lived through the 80s and watched football back then, football did seem to be maybe on the brink of ceasing to exist the way it was going with some of the tragedies that occurred then. But I mean, it's also, with hindsight, a decade where the seeds for what the Premier League became was sown as well, with the increased, by the end of the decade, money coming in through TV exposure. Chairman like Robert Maxwell, like Irving Scholar at Tottenham, David Dean at Arsenal as vice chairman, and Martin Edwards at Man United, looking to get more for their clubs, making a bit of a power grab, embracing the corporate side of it. So on the brink could mean many things. The go to war element is fans at war, government declaring war on football, and obviously you've got the Falklands War rumbling on in the background as well. So it's I think I described the 70s as a turbulent decade. I think the 80s by far matches and surpasses it, really.
Before we get into this wonderful chunk of a book, 370 pages, similar to the book previously that you wrote, that previously we did a podcast getting on how the 70s rocked football. Let's just have a backtrack and who is John Spurling? You're an absolute legend, and I love the way that I just love your books. I mean, they're not by Pitch Publishing, who are the usual publishers of football books, but it's bitebackpublishing.com who've done
Yeah.
both of your books, and they do a lot of political books, etc., and historical books. So talk to me about John Spurling. Talk to me about the publishing, because without these guys, the book doesn't get published, does it? And we can't read it.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been a freelancer for approaching 30 years now, so it's not my day job. I'm a teacher. I'm a politics and history teacher and a head of year at a big secondary school in Kent by day. So this is kind of like a side hustle and a hobby that's become a side hustle. So I've written several books before, mainly on Arsenal. Some of your listeners will stop listening at that point.
No, not at all, because we love football, John. It doesn't matter who you support. We love football. And when you're talking Arsenal, Charlie George in the 71, the double, and Arsenal, one of the great iconic clubs in British football.
I'd agree. And then, I started writing Get It On, the 70s book, just as lockdown started, because, everyone had a little bit more time at that point. And of course, the 80s is a natural progression. I mean, I went to buy it back because for the Get It On book, because I felt that when I looked at what kind of books they published, they did, as you say, they mainly do politics and some kind of social history, but they do some sport. And really, I think that these two books are not just about football. Yeah. They are about the football on the pitch, but they also look at the cultural developments of it and what's going on in the politics, because often the two things are linked. I mean, in the 70s. Harold Wilson was a big football fan. He believed that there was kind of mystical, as he put it, symbiosis between football and or between the Labour government and football. And obviously, when you come to the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher did not hold that view. She was she didn't dislike football per se. What she disliked is the fact that to her it was a law and order issue, and that something had to be done about it. And kind of like the events at the start of the decade only reinforced the fact that, football was something to be suspicious of and wary of. But I mean, when she met footballers, she got on well with them, but it's what the sport represented in terms of to a government that was very, very tough on law and order. So, Bite Back encouraged me to bring out the political parts of the book. And actually, the main quote for "Go to War" on the front from Dominic Sandbrook. I mean, he's a historian. He's a well-known historian, because I felt that it is part football, part social history. Of course, Terry Butcher on the back endorsed it, and he's very much very much part of 80s football. So it's a mixture, isn't it?
Absolutely. Has Terry got over the Diego Maradona situation from 86? Because I did have lunch with Terry and he still didn't seem as though he got over that. But what a character, what a top man Terry Butcher is. He tells a great story. He tells some great stories about Gaza. So I'm guessing that Terry Butcher may feature in your next book, which is going to be the 90s. But if I can just reference some of the players that's contributed to the book. And can I just say as well, I'd like to dedicate this podcast to the memory of one of my friends, Gary Shaw. I went to the same school as Gary. I first come across Gary or heard of Gary when I was about 7. It's a long story. I'm not going to go into it. But when I was 11, I realised why my PE teacher told me what he did when I was 7. Gary was an absolute legend, and our paths had crossed many times through school, through working, through me doing what I do and Gary doing what he does. And you couldn't wish to meet a nicer guy than Gary Shaw, and an absolute legend and a genius and a top football player as well to boot. So Gary Shaw and a European Cup winner, we're going to get into Aston Villa, because there's going to be a little bit of a Birmingham City and Aston Villa spin to this. But Ray Kennedy, Howard Kendall, Killer, Brian Kilcline, we all know that. Mark
Yeah.
Lawrence and John McGovern. It's like a who's who of football. I also noticed my friend Alan Hudson had
Yeah.
contributed to it as well.
On the British players in America.
Yeah,
He played for Seattle Sounders in America.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
what a great situation that was as well. So let's start at the beginning. There's a number of wonderful chapters in this book. I have it on my little table here with a glass of squash and Football on the Brink in the 80s, John Spurling. I love the go to war, the writing of it, the yellow and the orange and the red.
Yeah.
Writings, and it's almost like the kind of CFAX that we used to have in those days, and the picture of who developed the front picture, the front cover. You taught me through that firstly.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the font, because
Yeah.
the font for the 70s book was triple spoke,
Yes, it
which
was.
you get on those early 70s sports programs. Actually, the Go to War font here is part midweek sports special, which I don't know if that was broadcast everywhere, but I was in the southeast. It was definitely kind of London, Hertfordshire way where I was. So it's part midweek sports special, part BBC News font from BBC News from that era as well. But kind of Question of Sport had graphics which went that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's kind of it's hopefully people recognize it from that era. And then the picture itself, I do like that photo. I mean, for those who are listening but can't see it, it's Brian Robson at the 82 World Cup against the French goalkeeper in England's first World Cup match in 10 years, going for a header. He's got the away version of the classic Admiral kit from the 80s with the blue and red epaulets on the shoulder, with a sweatband on. And for me, it kind of sums up what a kind of aerial decade it was for football. You know, it was a much more aerial, direct, combative game back then than it is now. So that photo for me sums it all up. We looked, at numerous other ones, but I don't think any other photo came close to that one for summing up what the 80s was all about. And I hope you like the font as well, because to me it's 80s. I don't know. I hope it is to everyone else as well.
I just think it's a wonderful cover of the book, and it just talks, open me and have a look. And while it is talking to me and it's saying open me up, I'm gonna open it up. And I did note that it was dedicated to your late dad. Sadly, he passed away on the 18th of June, 2024. Yeah.
He did. Yeah, that's right. It's sad. As I was putting the finishing touches to the book,
I bet.
Yeah, he had one chest infection too many, I'm afraid. And he to a very good age, 93. And he did take me to my first game, my dad. He wasn't. I wouldn't ever say he was a football fan. He was used to wartime football. He grew up in East Anglia, and like a lot of people in Middle England, as I said earlier, I'm from Hertfordshire originally. I think he despaired at what football had become. He didn't like the bad language. He didn't like the terrible behaviour, the terrible quality of the trains. Then with fans smashing it up, the facilities weren't great. He got it. I think he got why I was into it, with the the excitement of match day. Charlie Nicholas's mullet. I think Mark Dennett. We played Southampton once. Mark Dennis had a spectacular mullet. He quite liked the chocolate wagon wheels at half time with his horrible cups of tea that they used to serve at Arsenal back then. So I think he got a bit of it, but I wouldn't say my dad was a football fan. No.
And there are 17 wonderful chapters, starting with the Mighty Mouse and the Malvinas. So let's start there, and it ends on the showdown and the fanzines and the inflatables, which the 80s incorporated everything. And I've just briefly fingered through the book. There's one or two musical references, particularly Boy George. Boy George was always one for a great quote and a new word in those days. And I just think that the 80s was a great time to grow up. In the 70s, I was a kid. In the
Yeah.
80s, I was just growing into a man, although I don't think I've grown into a man at 60 years of age now. But, but,
I
but you,
certainly haven't at 54.
we
Yeah.
don't grow up, I guess, is what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
we just still look at football and reference football as it was back then. So the book starts with Clem, probably the best English goalkeeper next to Gordon Banks in my lifetime, with
Yeah.
tear gas in his eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So England were in their first tournament for 10 years. They didn't qualify for any tournaments in the 70s whatsoever. They qualified for the 1980 European Championship, and they flew out to Italy in good spirits, and there was optimism that they could do well, because they had a lot of European Cup winners in the squad from Nottingham Forest and from Liverpool, a lot of experience that way, but not one of the players who ended up playing had any tournament experience, and I think that maybe was part of the reason they kind of underperformed. But they played Belgium in the first game, and England fans were fighting with locals who were cheering when Belgium equalised Ray Wilkins' goal. And the Italian riot police weighed in. They fired gas canisters in the direction of England fans, and actually England fans grabbed a couple of them and chucked them out of the way, which was towards the pitch. So Ray Clemence got caught downwind of tear gas. And it's a shocking image. I remember it well on TV. He'd sit there with his eyes streaming. Some of the other players were affected, but what they said is it was kind of they weren't necessarily furious at what happened. It was kind of like sad resignation that the English disease had taken root abroad. I mean, it was almost inevitable that this would happen. But to happen in the first game was disappointing. Margaret Thatcher said that English fans had shamed the country abroad, and that kind of set tone really for her attitude to football for the rest of the decade. I mean, England, they drew their first game. They lost the second game to Italy in what was the kind of like the blue ribbon match of the tournament, really. And then they beat Spain, but they because of other results, they didn't progress to the second stage. So, a win, a loss, and a draw, not a total disaster, but underperforming, a disappointment nonetheless. And really, I think with the hooliganism and that kind of thing, the blueprint had been set for the rest of the decade in that sense, anyway.
It was a great goal, though, that Ray scored, wasn't it?
Amazing.
It was a great
I
goal,
mean,
him
he
jumping
lobbed
up.
he
He did, yeah.
lobbed the defender, lobbed the defender, then lobbed the goalkeeper. And as he said to me, it was a brilliant goal, albeit an almost completely forgotten one. Not many people know or be able to visualise that Ray Wilkins goal.
I can, because I remember jumping up and down in my front room when Ray scored that goal, and it was typically
Yes.
like not Ray Wilkins, wasn't it?
It wasn't,
But it
no,
was
that's
superb.
right.
But you're right. I mean, the 70s wasn't a great decade for England at international level. The
No.
70s and the 80s was a great period for our clubs at club level. We dominated Europe, but I just think that there's been a lot written about how England failed during the 70s. And I think that it's a big imbalance, because it puts a lot of emphasis on we didn't have the players, we failed, we didn't qualify. I would look at and nuance that and say that it was the management that let our players down. My mate Alan only played twice. Stan Bowles, I think, played 5 times. I think Frank played 5 times. Charlie played once. TC played, I think, 17. In fact, his last game, Don Revie, was Switzerland away, that we won. And Revie didn't fancy Tony Curry because he didn't think that he worked hard enough. Tony did in that game, and it's his one big regret. And if he could replay a game, it would be that game. So, all of our maverick players were disregarded. In fact, Revie had a get-together with England's players, got 5 or 6 of them to one side and said that they didn't fit into the plan. So I'd love to see a book being written exactly how we didn't qualify with, in my opinion, the greatest group of footballers I've seen in my lifetime. And I put that squarely down to bad management.
Stubbornness, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah, stubbornness. I
And has
think
followed
also,
us, John, to this day. We
yeah.
don't like maverick players. We don't like players that think out the box and play football the way that lots of us football supporters would love to see it being played.
No, that's right. I think also, in the 70s, I mean, one of the issues is that only one team from a group could
Correct.
qualify. So England
Yeah.
in 74 up against a really good Polish side. I mean,
Yes.
they finished third in the World Cup that year.
And Olympic champions as well.
Yeah,
Olympic
they were a
champions.
really good side. I mean, if it had been two qualifying, England would have qualified, with no problem. And then
Yeah.
again in '78, again they're up against a good Italian team,
Brilliant
which although
Italian
it
side.
underperformed, many of
Yeah.
those players then went on to win the World Cup in '82.
Absolutely.
So I think England could count themselves as being quite unlucky.
Yes.
Yeah, certainly under Don Revie, rather like Alf Ramsey, he mistrusted players of the type that you mentioned, like Hudson and Bowles and Charlie George. I suppose they didn't always do themselves a favour in his eyes. They had a certain lifestyle. They enjoyed wearing their badge of non-conformity. And I think that managers of the vintage of Ramsey and Revie, they probably just couldn't fathom the kind of people that they were. They'd done national service, that kind of thing. These guys were the kind of baby boom generation of the post-war era. It's as much a generational clash as anything, isn't it?
Absolutely, and arguably the biggest maverick of the lot. Arguably, you could say his finest or worst hour was in Superstars, and that was Stan the Man.
Stan Bowles.
Stan Bowles, I mean, he shot the table, didn't he, in shooting? He capsized the canoe with Malcolm McDonald in the next canoe. I mean, he was absolutely useless, but brilliant in the same breath, wasn't he, Stan?
Yeah. I mean, his life off the pitch was chaotic, wasn't it? As we all know. But on the pitch, that was where I think he found his bearings, like a lot of performers do. Often their lives off the pitch can be turbulent, but when they're on stage or when they're in front of the camera or on the pitch, that's when they find themselves. That's them. It's like Paul Gascoigne, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Stan Bowles, as you alluded to, he had a lot of problems off the pitch, but when Stan was on the pitch, that was his stage, and he owned that pitch. And it was a joy to watch those Maverick players. It was also a joy to watch our players playing in Europe, because whether it be Liverpool, Nottingham Forest, and Aston Villa bringing it round to Birmingham, First League Championship that they won in 71 years at your place, under the clock at Highbury, although they got beat 2-0, something that always wrangled with the Villa boys. But as I said to Dennis in one of my podcasts, Dennis, over 42 games as it was back then, you got more points on the board than anybody else. You had 14 derbies, of which 11 that you won. I think Ipswich Town, that finished second, had 2, and I think they lost both. I mean, Villa was a great team that won the league with 14 players, and they were a functional side, a tremendous team. Lots of people thought it was 4-3-3 with Tony Morley as a forward, but Tony said, no, we were a 4-4-2. And Tony Morley, the funniest guy I've ever had the privilege to do a podcast
I like Tony
with.
Morley.
Oh, he's
very
hysterical.
Sharp.
He's hysterical, isn't he?
I mean, that's it. I mean, English clubs in the early 80s were phenomenal in Europe. You had Villa, first of all, Nottingham Forest in 1980, then Liverpool in 81, Villa in 82. You had Liverpool in 84. You've got Everton winning the Cup Winners' Cup, and Tottenham and Ipswich winning the UEFA Cup. I mean, it was an amazing period of success. where the kind of like, the English style, the direct combative approach really did work. That doesn't always translate into tournaments for England, as we've seen. But unfortunately, the Heysel disaster of '85 drew a line under all of that and was a real full stop for football for decades, really, because English clubs weren't in Europe for 6 years, and during that time it's kind of like a time of introspection, kind of stagnation, really, in terms of tactics. And it's not until 1991 that English clubs get back in Europe. So it's it's sad, and it took a long time for English football to get back on track as a result of what happened at Heysel.
And when we're talking about functional teams, I'd put Everton and Villa in the same bracket. Everton were a tremendous side that were sadly denied the chance of competing in the European Cup. But again, let's go back to Heysel. That was a terrible, terrible evening. I remember I was just starting off on the taxis, and I'd be out with my dad learning the trade, and we went over to the pub, watching it in the bar, and the game had been delayed, and what's going on? We didn't know at the time, and there was terrible crowd trouble. But I remember that there was Juventus supporter with a gun. It wasn't just the English thugs that have played up abroad. There was a lot of thugs from abroad playing up with the English. I guess our reputation preceded us a lot, but the English disease, as the press had always put that as a moniker for us, there was also a foreign disease of hooliganism as well. We didn't invent hooliganism. We maybe have taken it to another level, but in Holland, in France, in many countries, Germany, all over Europe, hooliganism really was on the rise in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah, that's true. It was the Heysel disaster capped an awful month, because 2 weeks before, on the same day, you had the Bradford fire at Valley Parade, and then you'd had the poor fella at St Andrews who died when a wall collapsed on top of him when Leeds fans and Birmingham fans were rioting at St Andrews. And that was 2 months after you'd had the riot at Kenilworth Road when Luton played Millwall in the FA Cup. So, to be honest, the amazing thing is really that with hindsight, again, these disasters that we're talking about, they weren't a surprise. They could easily have happened in the 70s because, the stadia were decaying. The infrastructure was poor. There was no investment in football, certainly not football grounds. Safety, had collapsed. And really, when I was doing research for the book, there were examples, for instance, of crushing, outside games, inside games. It's amazing that no one had died from that, before '85. And obviously then, at Hillsborough, you have the Liverpool fans crushed at Hillsborough. And I think my point is that any of those disasters could have happened years before, because if you think about terraces during the 60s and 70s when they were fuller, clubs would cram in as many supporters as they could to maximise their profits. There was no thought of health and safety or spectator safety during that era, was there? We'd had examples at Norwich and Nottingham Forest of stands burning down, before the Bradford fire. It's just amazing on the days when the Forest and the Norwich stands burned down that there wasn't a game going on. But these accidents are kind of like accidents waiting to happen. And unfortunately, things come home to roost in the 80s. Absolutely.
And I think that back in those days, although we had official attendances, I'm sure that it was official, unofficial, because there seemed to be more in football grounds than the football clubs let on. I remember being at Shrewsbury Town with Birmingham City in our promotion season, 79, 80, and there was over 15,000 at the Gay Meadow. I remember the stadium announcer saying, "Well, the Birmingham City fans, please get off the roof and the floodlight pylons because it's liable to collapse." And I remember being there and thinking, don't go down, because if you do, you're going to get get trampled on. I was about maybe 15, 16 at the time, going away with Birmingham. But you're right. Every football fan of that era has a story where they've been in a situation where it was very scary and it was very close to having something like what happened a few years later at Hillsborough on us football fans up and down the country.
Yeah, I mean, it was a reminder that there was that invisible safety net never
Yeah.
actually was there. I mean, start with the Hillsborough disaster. I mean, when Leeds and Coventry played there 2 years before, I think it was, Leeds fans then complained about the crushing at Leppings Lane. When Wolves played Tottenham in 81 at Hillsborough, some fans had to be pulled out then because of crushing. It's not like the danger signs weren't there. They were just ignored. And when fans did complain, that they just kind of seemed to disappear into the ether. Nothing was done about it. And that was football then, stuff brushed under the carpet, insufficient care paid to spectator safety. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nostalgia about football from that era, in the sense that, football now is too it's overblown, it's lost its edge, and all of that. But one thing it is now is safer. No football fans should go to games and not come home, should they?
And let's be honest as well, John, if I can just interrupt you there, because you're absolutely spot on. Us football supporters were treated like scum in those days. We were the scourge of society. We had perimeter fences erected at football grounds. I'm not saying that football fans didn't carry some of the burden and some of the blame, because there was trouble. I remember as a kid, Chelsea running through St Andrews. I remember I wasn't there at the Leeds game. I was learning my trade with my dad on the black cabs. At the Hillsborough game, when Hillsborough started, I was just pulling off New Street Station, and we were aware of something that had gone on at Hillsborough. It was very different in those days because we didn't have mobile phones. There wasn't the service that we have in the media. So even at the end of the game, when the Everton fans were returning to New Street Station, they were really concerned about their brothers from Liverpool and what had gone on at Hillsborough, because at Villa Park it was very, very different and everybody was very, very safe.
Yes, no, that's right. I mean, I was on the day of Hillsborough, I was at Highbury watching Arsenal Newcastle. And, before the game, as you say, there's no mobile phones. But what fans did do, many of them, is take transistor radios to the game and have them up against their ears. So, we got, and because it's semi-final day, probably there were more fans doing that, I think, because it was a big day. And before the game, we heard that there was a delayed kickoff at Liverpool. And then it was apparently because of crowd trouble, and everyone shrugged and said, "Well, that's football." At the moment, there was, let's be honest, multiple games were delayed kickoff wise because of that. It wasn't until about 3:30 that some saying, "Oh, I think people," because they might have got through to local radio somewhere. There's deaths up there, and I think by half time it was very, very clear that something bad had happened. Alan Smith, who was injured that day, told the Arsenal players what was going on, because he was watching the TV at half time. He had a fractured cheekbone. So they found out. And by the end of the Arsenal game against Newcastle, it was very, very subdued. And when we came out of Highbury and headed towards the tube station, most people were crowding around people who had, transistors, listening. Peter Jones, the wonderful Radio 2 commentator, talking about makeshift stretchers that were had been advertising hoardings, the oxygen tanks that were visible. It was very clear that a major disaster had taken place. But as you say, it took a long time for that to filter through accurately. Most people thought it was because of fighting, which obviously it wasn't.
And even so, with justice and the truth, it took an even longer amount of time because there
Decades.
were
Yeah.
certain newspapers that went with the headlines of Liverpool supporters going in without tickets and going
Yeah.
through the pockets of the dead. And I remember there was an awful lot about Hillsborough, falsifying of evidence, etc., by West Midlands police that were looking after South Yorkshire police, and
Yeah.
it was a web of deceit and lies. And again, it was because of we were football supporters. If it would have
Yeah.
been any other group of people, we wouldn't have had to live through that hell. Not that we particularly did, but the people of Liverpool had to. And even to this day, still stained by it, because there's still some horrible chants from football fans
Yeah.
towards those terrible tragedies that Liverpool had to endure in the 80s, Hillsborough and Heysel.
That's right. That's right. And I think that the football, would have changed after Hillsborough anyway. I think it would have changed more slowly though. But it changed. It had to change rapidly
Yeah.
because of the Taylor report, which recommended that all grounds in the top flight should become all-seater. I think without that legal kind of framework in place, eventually it would have taken a lot longer for grounds to become all-seater. Partly, of course, because clubs are by nature quite conservative. They were worried about where the money was going to come from. But as I say, by the early days of the Premier League, many grounds and stands are building sites, aren't they? And naturally, because of the rising costs, ticket prices go up, and then that changes the dynamic of the crowds at matches. In the 80s, you could still call football broadly the working class game, the working man's game, whereas by the mid 90s, it was becoming an increasingly kind of middle class game in terms of clientele at matches. And I think in some ways, obviously, what we haven't got at football now is groups of kids who can go to games in the top flight together. It's much harder to do that. It's too expensive. And obviously with seats, you've got less leeway, haven't you, to, someone doesn't want to come or they drop out or someone wants to come late. Everything's got to be planned. The spontaneity's gone in that respect. And like I said earlier, although football's safer, that spontaneity has gone. And I think it's sad that groups of kids, because I used to go with mates and I used to really enjoy it, and it's much harder for kids these days to do that because of how football's changed.
Again, I left school in 1981, so round that time of you writing your book, Go to War, Football on the Brink in the 80s, I was going to football games at St Andrews with my cousins and my friends, etc. We
Yeah.
go to away games at the Albion, we go to Crystal Palace, Liverpool would turn up at St Andrews, we'd have a look and see how many fans Liverpool had brought. The Tilton was fantastic. There was that no man's land between it. Okay, they were throwing things at each other in those days. It was absolutely manic, but you could just pay your money and you could walk in and you could stand on the terraces. Although at
Yeah.
Coventry City it wasn't quite like that, because Jimmy and the Sky Blue, whatever Jimmy Hill did, I mean, very similar to Malcolm Allison, what Malcolm done at Crystal Palace, totally transformed both Crystal Palace and Coventry City. And Coventry, first all-seated stadia, and that was the first time I was actually on a pitch, because Birmingham City stayed up last game of the season when Mental Mickey put in an Ian Andy sides cross to keep Birmingham City into the first division.
Yeah.
Jimmy Hill, what a footballing pioneer.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jimmy Hill got the idea of all-seater stadia, making Highfield Road an all-seater stadia from his time in America.
Yep.
So Jimmy Hill was quite a big player. Jimmy Hill had fingers in every pie going, I think.
Match of the day, yeah, he did.
Yeah, and I did enjoy speaking to him, and he was a remarkable figure. But I mean, what he saw in America was that the stadia were all-seater. Families were welcome. There were sections for kids. They had barbecues in the car parks. They gave out freebies like badges and hats and all of that. And he said, why is English football nowhere near at this level? In fact, George Best said the same to me. It's a real eye-opener in America, that their culture surrounding their sports were a lot different from what it was in England. So Jimmy Hill, who was chairman of Coventry, like you said, turned Highfield Road all-seater, but you may recall I think it was in a game against Leeds, many of the seats got ripped out. And in the end, Coventry fans themselves said that they wanted to return to a partially terraced ground, which is what happened. That weird away end at Coventry, which was, whenever I went, it was always bloody freezing cold. But it was an open away end. And as Jimmy Hill said, we were, as in Coventry, were 10 years ahead of our time, and English football was 10 years behind it. And that's probably about right. He's probably not wrong there.
I would say Jimmy was wrong, because I think Jimmy was probably 20 years ahead of his time.
Yeah.
He really was. As was Paul Trevelyan as well, because, Paul with the sock tags and the, self-motivation at Leeds United. He'd gone to America and seen the dancing girls and doing all the, the stuff. The trainers would come on before the game. Paul Trevelyan was a big pioneer in what was going on off the pitch in those days, as were the managers, because what was going on the pitch was fantastic, but what was going off the pitch was equally as entertaining, with Mr. Brian Howard Clough, Mr. Bojangles Ron Atkinson, and Big Malcolm Allison. Three legends, three massive characters. We don't see that today.
No, we really don't.
Do we?
No, we don't. I mean, it's kind of like it's the last hurrah, if you like, of character managers like that. I mean, Brian Clough. I write about Brian Clough at the start of the book, and obviously he was a big figure in the 80s and into the early 90s, but his relationship with Peter Taylor was in free fall by the start of the 80s. And when Forest won the European Cup in 1980, Peter Taylor said, there'll be many more successes to come. It's amazing to think that was really the end of the story for them. Within a few months, they were also Rans, and they had a falling out, and that affected Clough for the rest of his life. Because although Forest were always a great team to watch, easy on the eye, they won a couple of League Cups, they were never the force that they had been. Malcolm Allison was manager at Manchester City, and unfortunately, the bigger his Big Mal persona became, the sort of, it seemed to lessen his powers as Malcolm Allison, the coach or the manager, because the early 80s at Man City were about the £1 million transfer dealings that went wrong with Steve Daly, the most expensive man in English football. You had Kevin Reeves coming in. You had Michael Robinson, Steve McKenzie. None of those moves really worked out. Although Kevin Reeves, was there for a bit, and he scored in the 1981 Cup final. And then, of course, Ron Atkinson at Man United, who did last a bit longer.
The holidays are a time to feel and create joy. And what could be more joyous than the look on her face as she unwraps a stunning new jewelry piece from Blue Nile? How about getting 50% off your purchase? Blue Nile offers premium quality, priced below traditional retail. Their online experts are available 24/7 to answer any questions and make sure you've picked the perfect gift. For a limited time, you can get 50% off at BlueNile.com. That's 50% off at BlueNile.com.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Three fantastic managers that we will never, ever see the like again. And three managers that was managing at the top of the trade in the English First Division since 1978, and then the introduction of the foreigners after 78 World Cup. Foreign nationals have come into this game and made left a tremendous mark, and took our game on to a new level. And I'm sure that's something that you're going to be talking about in your next book of the 90s. And to this day, our foreign players are absolutely loved. But I do want to just talk about Steve Daly. That wasn't Steve's fault, was it?
No.
But I remember Steve, I had a lunch, dinner, whatever with Steve at a function. Andy Blair was doing them. Andy Blair is fantastic. Steve Daly is the best after dinner speaker
Yeah,
I have ever heard. He could be
he's
a
amazing.
comedian, but he sat down and we were having something to eat, and I said to Steve, "What happened, Steve, at Man City?" And he says, "When I signed, I asked Mel if we had to sell players for me to sign, and the assurance was they didn't have to sell any players. They did sell players, and it went from bad to worse." He said, "I'd be out with my kids in a restaurant. Man City fans would throw a penny at my feet and would literally say in front of my wife and kids, 'That's all you're worth.'" He
Yeah,
was almost on a nervous breakdown
yeah.
and went to Seattle with Hudson. Kenny Hibbett joined him over there, and in 1982, Seattle Saunders had their most fantastic season
Mm.
that they've ever had, and they were again. Steve was very, very, very much part of that time there at Seattle, but that time at Manchester, it was hell for him.
Yeah, it was. I mean, what basically the managers, Malcolm Allison and John Barnwell at Wolves, I think they agreed a fee of something like, was it for 500,000, 600,000 or
Something like
something
that,
like
wasn't it?
that?
Yeah.
And it was all going to go through. And then Peter Swales got involved, the kind of bewigged Manchester City chairman, and suddenly the price gets hiked up to way over $1 million. And what Steve Daly said to me, because I saw him doing an after dinner, he is, as you say,
Brilliant,
he's
isn't
amazing, isn't he?
he?
He's
Yeah.
has the crowd in the palm of his hand. He said Manchester City were bidding against themselves. It made no sense whatsoever for City to pay that amount of money. And I think Swales later said he was trying to, almost stick two fingers up at that lot at Old Trafford, as he called them.
Yeah.
But as he said, he really should have minded his own business and crack on, because just to kickstart all that spending, Manchester City sold Gary Owen and Peter Barnes, who were very, very popular players. Peter Barnes was a local boy when his dad was Ken Barnes, was a big part of Manchester City. And it wasn't based in any logic or common sense whatsoever. Michael Robinson was a good player, but mainly played out on the wing by Malcolm Allison and not given a lot of hope. He said, it became a nightmare. He lived in a nice house in Hale because they were paying them extraordinary wages. Michael Robinson, I think his weekly wage increased, was it tenfold at Manchester City? He never asked for it, and then he went to Brighton and was on £1,000 a week. He said never asked for that either. So there were clubs willing to throw money around at that time. But Steve Daly was on a ridiculous 10-year contract at £500 a week, which is a lot of money for a footballer back then. And I'm supposed that when he left for Seattle City, he had to honour it. But that's the kind of reckless spending that they were involved in. And it's the first time I ever sort of really talked to players where, the huge transfer tags, the tags on them really affected them. Because that's a lot of money for Steve Daly to go for. And as you say, it really did play on his mind, and he had to get out of the country for his own peace of mind, didn't he? His own welfare.
Absolutely, because when you look at, like, in 1973, Huddy went for a British record at that time of 240,000 from Chelsea to Stoke City. By the time Trevor Francis, the first £1 million in February of 1979, and Andy Gray had gone and Steve Daly, it had just gone spiralling out of control. I remember at the time we were thinking, when's this going to end? How is it going to end? It has to end. We're still saying the same things today. It just seems crackers. But I think Shaq was right when he wrote that chapter in his book about the chairman. I think he absolutely nailed it. And I think as a consequence, it has gone to ridiculous lengths. FA Cups and Cup final songs. The 1981 Cup final for me has to be the most memorable. And Ricky Villa scored the goal in
Yeah.
Steve Perryman's shirt.
Yes, yeah, he did. He did. I mean, I was lucky enough to speak to Ricky Villa in the book. He was over publicising his autobiography a good few years ago now, but I managed to nab him. He was he was good company. He was looking at me curiously when I started speaking to him. He said, "You all right?" And he said, after 5 minutes, I'm just amazed because everyone else this week has asked me how Aussie is, because where's Aussie? How's Aussie? And you haven't done that. I said, "Oh no, sorry." So we carried on after that, but he was good fun. But he was so used to playing second fiddle, I think, to Aussie Ardiles, because Ardiles could speak better English. I think he just, acclimatized better. And Ricky Villa was kind of a bit lost, for his first few seasons, in English football. He had a poor first game against Man City, the game that ended 1-1 on the Saturday, and he got subbed. And very famously had that, that he trudged around the perimeter of the pitch and went for an early bath. And I think he thought that was it. I think he thought his Tottenham career was over. Keith Birkinshaw, the Tottenham manager, grabbed him afterwards and said, "You're playing." And of course, he had the night of his life. He scored their first goal, slammed home his first goal from close range. And then, of course, you had the Steve McKenzie goal, which, again, is kind of often forgotten. But it's an amazing volley from 25 yards, which, as Villa said, would probably have deserved to win any other game. But then kind of Villa put into practice what he'd learnt in Argentina when he was a kid, dribbling by himself around the trees around his house, because Villa's dad was worked on the Pampas in Argentina. And Villa's iconic goal against Manchester City is perhaps, I don't know, from an Arsenal fan, perhaps the greatest ever FA Cup final goal. I don't know. Certainly, perhaps one of the most iconic, and everyone will always, remember it. And that's Villa's place in Tottenham folklore cemented, isn't it?
Absolutely. He used to go to school on a horse, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Argentina. And I think also Ricky was a victim of the times, because if Ricky was playing now as a foreigner, he would be able to play for Tottenham. But in those days, players, if you played for like the Republic of Ireland, they classed them as a foreigner, and they couldn't play in the English game, could they? Yeah. So I think you could play through, and often Keith Birkinshaw would ask Ozzy about situations because Ricky's command of the English language wasn't as great as Ozzy's, and Ozzy used to say to the gaffer, "I don't think Ricky fancies it today," so he'd pick Ozzy.
Yeah, I mean, Villa said he could play within about 5 minutes. He knew if he was going to have a good or a bad game. It was just maddeningly inconsistent, and no one was more annoyed by it than him. Yeah. But that 81 replay was his night, wasn't it? And I remember he said to me that his contract was up for negotiation before it, and basically he got offered the same terms as before, whereas Ozzy's contract was much improved. So Villa said basically it'll be a pay cut, allowing for inflation, and that was the end of it. Once he scored that goal, he got the contract he wanted. That was much improved. But of course, the next season neither Ardiles nor Villa played in the '82 Cup final. Yes. Ardiles was already on a training camp for the '82 World Cup with Argentina. Villa didn't play because of the situation in the Falklands, because it had just blown up at that time, so it was considered better he wouldn't play. The story went it would have been awkward if Tottenham had won it, because Princess Anne, I think, was presenting the medals, and it wouldn't have been appropriate for an Argentine player to shake the hands of a member of the British royal family when the two countries were at war. I mean, Villa hadn't heard that, but I think that's the story about why officially he didn't play anyway.
But again, going back to the shirts in the programme, the original game, Steve Perryman was the number 5, and Ricky Villa was the number 6. And for the replay, Ricky had his number 5 shirt because Steve had his normal number 6 shirt back again. So that's
I
why,
didn't know that.
that's
I
why
didn't know
Ricky
that.
actually scored in Steve's shirt. Yeah, and Keith
Hmm.
always asked the opinion of his skipper, Steve Perryman, and what Steve said after Ricky had charged off. Shall I play him in the replay, or would you play him, Steve? No, I fucking wouldn't, but he
Yeah,
did. And
yeah,
Tottenham went on to be glorious winners. Always when there's a 1 in the in the year, Tottenham win something, particularly the FA Cup. The last non-league club to win that wonderful trophy as well. 1984 was a great year. It was Stoke's great escape, and arguably the greatest escape from the top flight. When Hudson came back from America, Stoke were in a perilous position. I put it to Ron when he took over at Nottingham Forest, and I said, "You were in a little bit of a perilous position, wasn't you, Ron?" "Perilous," he said. "Let me tell you, the Titanic had got more chance of staying up than Forest."
yeah,
You could say the same for Stoke City, but
yeah,
Hudson weaved his magic and steered Stoke City from the rapids of relegation to survival on the
yeah.
final day.
I mean, the following year there was another one with Coventry who won. Was it their final 3 games? That because of the way that that there was so many postponements because of the harsh winter. They had a load of games, and they even whooped Everton, who were champions, 4-1, because I think Everton were resting some players and they played like a second string team, and Coventry hammered them 4-1 and stayed up. So yeah, the 80s was also the era of some great escapes, as you say.
It was also the decade where Keith Birchin nearly drowned George Michael in a nightclub in Ibiza while they were filming Club Tropicana.
Is that so? Now that I didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. The
Ah.
nightclub was filling up with water, and he just just bumped into this kid, and he fell in there, and he almost drowned. And he
All
said
right.
it was George Michael. Well done,
Oh
Keith.
wow. I
Yeah,
never knew that. I
yeah.
never knew that.
Arguably the greatest game of the decade, certainly at international level and going on to the World Cup in '82, was that Brazil versus Italy game.
Yes.
What a game, and what a chunk of a book that's come out of that game, let me tell you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, for me, the '82 World Cup will always be the World Cup. I
Yeah.
think probably because it was in an era when there was very, very little football on TV. You know, you had the FA Cup final, you had England, Scotland, the home international, and you had a European Cup final if an English team was in it. But this is like it was a feast, wasn't it, of football.
Yeah.
Many of the games were played late afternoon, and that Brazil-Italy game, I believe, was played at 4 o'clock. So everyone in my school literally ran home to watch it. You know, it was a sun-drenched game. I mean, the photo on the front of my book, the England-France game, that kicked off at 4 midweek as well, because I remember going home to watch that. But that Brazil-Italy game, you know, was everything. It's the iconic kits, you know, the gold of Brazil, the dark blue of Italy. You know, you had that amazing Brazil team with Socrates and Zico and Adair. They could do anything, but unfortunately, they were defensively suspect, shall we say? And they caught Paolo Rossi on one of his amazing days. You know, we say that Ricky Villa had his day in '81. Well, Rossi had his purple patch, you know, during the latter stages of that World Cup, because Italy had started off terribly. I think they drew their opening 3 games.
Yeah, I think 0-0.
Yeah, squeaked through. I think they drew 1-1 with Cameroon.
I think they did, yeah. 1-1 and 2 0-0s.
Yeah. And then suddenly, bang, you know, they exploded in the latter stages with Rossi, who'd had a ban from the game for being implicated in a betting scandal in Serie A, suddenly exploded. But I mean, I think Brazil were, you know, probably everyone's favorite team. Well, not everyone's, but you know what I mean. Everyone's certainly second favorite team beyond their own country, because the way they play was just pure, unadulterated skill. Probably the last time a team played like that, and it's a shame they didn't win. But you know, they didn't. And perhaps, a more defensively astute Italy deserved it on because, to beat West Germany in the final, because they were a more rounded team. But that Brazil team were the stuff of dreams, weren't they?
Any truth Paolo had 10-1 on him himself scoring a hat-trick?
I don't know. I've not heard that. Possibly. I've not heard that.
But again, they'd done it in 1990, didn't they, with Toto Schillaci? Italy always had this ability to bring out great forwards. I mean, Macausio and Bettiger in 78. Italy was a very, very, very dangerous team. But you're right, Brazil, they played to the samba beat, and arguably the last great team not to win a major tournament. And I think they had Serginho, didn't they, up front, a big lump of an attacker. But Zico, Socrates, Eder and Junior, again, for me, were the bedrock of that team. And they were a joy to watch. As kids, we would then get the ball out and try and play football like they did. Shame that they didn't win it. But as you say, the Italians, even to this day, phenomenal at defending and always, or certainly often, find a way of getting results and winning titles.
Yeah. No, exactly right. But that Brazil team was, the way, I guess, in an ideal world, football should be played, wasn't
absolutely, 100%. I wish that they would have won it, because I loved watching Brazil, and they all looked great as well, didn't they? And then like them, I mean, not but for the girls, the tight shorts in 1982. I mean, Zico, what a player! We always love to see the Brazilian number 10 and following in the footsteps of Pele and Rivellino, but Zico was every inch the man, and of course had the goal disallowed, didn't he, in the 78 with Clive the Buck Thomas.
Yes,
and Maradona,
right.
Maradona, when they played against Brazil in 82, got himself sent off, and I don't think we seen Diego until 1986. But my word, didn't he come back with interest?
No. That's right. I mean, when after that 82 World Cup, as you say, Maradona got sent off against the old enemy, Argentina, and he was kind of ostracised by the national team for a while. And Carlos Bilardo, the new manager of Argentina, was putting it around that Maradona wouldn't actually go to the 86 World Cup. That's what he told Bobby Robson. Bobby Robson thought, I think you're having me on here. I'm not sure that's absolutely true. And as you say, it wasn't true. Maradona came back with a vengeance in 86 as England found out to their cost.
But we should have known about Diego, because as a young kid, he'd come to England in 1980 when we won 3-1, but he went on amazing in that game and almost scored a carbon cutout goal of the one that he did score in the Azteca Stadium in 1986. Diego, in my opinion, the greatest player that I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I mean, Maradona had kind of, come face to face with English football before. I mean, that 1980, there's as you say, a prestige friendly before the 1980 Euros, where England unveiled their new Admiral kit, actually. Yeah. And Maradona, the piece of skill is unbelievable. He within seconds, he's wriggled free of 4 England players, goes in the box. But this time, what he does is he kind of flicks the ball and it clipped the outside of the post and went wide. Whereas in 86, as you say, almost a carbon copy move as he slaloms past England's defenders. This time, his brother said he had a nanosecond, and he remembered 1980. And he said, right, this time I'll do it differently. And he goes round Peter Shilton instead. And scored. And I suspect it's probably true, because I think that athletes, when they're under pressure like that, or when they're in the zone, literally time almost takes on a different kind of meaning, and probably processing something in a nanosecond feels like a lot longer in their mind. So I can imagine that he processed, recalibrated, and then obviously put the ball past Shilton in 86 to knock England out of the World Cup.
And also, Steve Hodge was the recipient of his shirt, and it's done his pension funds a world of good, hasn't it?
This holiday season, when you can't be there, let 1-800-Flowers.com deliver. At 1-800-Flowers, every gift is crafted with care and designed to make spirits bright. From classic holiday bouquets and unique one-of-a-kind designs to gift bundles you can't find anywhere else, 1-800-Flowers makes it easy to stay connected, no matter the distance. Just a few clicks and your thoughtful gift is on its way. Visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST to deliver joy, beauty, and celebration this holiday season.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He was able to auction off that shirt. I mean, actually, the referee also auctioned off the ball a while ago. I think it pocketed him $2.5 million. So that there's that element to it as well. Yeah, there's a lot of people have made money out of that game because it's maybe the iconic World Cup game. I don't know. I mean, the France. Argentina World Cup final in 2022 is pretty good, wasn't it? But I think the 86 World Cup quarter final does take some beating for various reasons. Yeah,
I'm guessing Peter Shilton didn't auction off his gloves.
No, he didn't. He, along with Terry Butcher, he's one of those that will not forgive Maradona. I think the others have kind of come to terms with it. Peter Reid has. I think Gary Lineker's interviewed him a couple of times, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Or interviewed him a couple of times. But Butcher and Shilton, no, there's no going back on that with them.
And shirt sponsors, commercialisation. Really started it in the ground, didn't it? The Kaching, the Tills, the chairman of football clubs are looking to a whole new ball game where they steal the soul of English football from the league and form another league, the Premier League. It always makes me laugh when we had the Super League and not the same chairman, but similar, and the clubs. How dare this Super League try and nick our clubs and form a Super League? Absolutely disgraceful. I'm thinking, that's what you did in 1992.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, advertising does take off in the 80s. It's by no means all clubs have sponsors around 1980. Liverpool were the first with Hitachi, and then they go to Crown Paints, didn't they? Do you remember that kit that they had? But I think it's an example, isn't it, of club chairmen and directors trying to max out their profits and trying to get as much money as they can. I mean, again, the sponsorship deals back then were laughably low. Yeah. I think the first Liverpool deal was for 100,000 spread over 2 seasons. I mean, 50,000 a year to Liverpool was, a okay amount, but it wasn't going to change the course of their history. Nowadays shirts or boots, shirt sponsorships are, astronomically more than that. But yeah, it's true that by the late 80s, every club had a sponsor.
I guess the 80s was the pivotal decade where it all clicked into place and it changed. It started in the 60s. It then gained momentum in the 70s, and by the 80s everything was in place, and it literally was a whole new ball game going into the 90s. But football fans particularly in this country, I think fans all over the world are fantastic, but we have a great sense of humour as well, don't we, in this country? And the inflatables, etc., the fanzines and the songs, the humour of the football fans really again started to gain momentum in the 80s, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we focused early on about some of the tragedies in the 80s, which still sit above the game during that era. The game will always be remembered for that in that era. And yet, as you say, the majority of football fans love their football. They have a fantastic sense of humour. And I think you can see that, as you say, with the inflatables craze in the late 80s, started by Manchester City fan Frank Newton with the inflatable bananas. And then other clubs got in on the act with their fans bringing in all sorts, West Ham's with hammers, even some Man United fans got on the act as well. Grimsby Town fans with their inflatable haddocks.
Yep.
And then, of course, you have the fanzines. You've got When Saturday Comes, started out in the late 80s. I interviewed Andy Mitten, who's still editor of United We Stand now, all those years later. And what he said to me was, I wanted to show that I am not a football hooligan. There are massive issues in the game about facilities, about spectator comfort. The membership scheme, which was mooted at the time, which probably would have killed off a good third of supporters, because you had to basically become a member of a club to get into that ground.
We had it at Birmingham. We had it at Birmingham. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean that would have, it would have curtailed, floating supporters. Yeah, but I think the Taylor report said it was unworkable, so it didn't happen.
It was.
But yeah, exactly. You've got fanzines coming in which are funny, but they're also satirical. They sort of set a new template for football writing. So fans are kind of striking back at the end of the decade, really, and showing that actually they do care. They're not all knuckle scraping hooligans. And as you say, the template is set for the next decade, especially, of course, if you look at the showdown at Anfield in May '89, where the drama is beamed into millions of homes on TV. So that night, Liverpool-Arsenal it's kind of like, Super Sunday, Monday night football, Friday night football, all rolled into one, and then some. Jim Rosenthal said that these days, Sky or TNT Sports will bite your hand off and pay you a king's ransom for a game of that nature, where the top two go into the last game of the season with the title still in balance, in the balance. And, I think that, some say that the Manchester City title when they beat QPR in that game is the showdown. But I still don't think you can beat what happened in 89 at Anfield for the sheer drama and all the converging themes of, tragedy and salvation and a young team and the Friday night under the lights at Anfield. I still think that that's, the sort of game, the kind of ultimate final season climax. And I say, you can see the power of TV. And ITV, before that game, a year before, had won the rights to screen live football. And the mere presence of Sky B meant that they had to break that cartel with the BBC, up their offer. And you can see now that TV view football perhaps as a sport worth investing in. Whereas during the 80s, as we've said, there was hardly any live football on. There was even a blackout of football for 6-7 months during the 85-86 season after Heysel. That's what sort of a state English football was in. But by the very end, you can see where the game's probably going to go in the 90s.
I absolutely 100% agree. That was the biggest watershed moment of association football and television when Arsenal went to Anfield, won by 2-0. It was a phenomenal TV spectacular, not just an event. And I think that blew everything out the water. I do hear the newbies saying about the Manchester City and QPR, but nah, the two top teams going head to head almost as a first division cup final. It was something that hasn't been replicated. I'm sure TV would love to, but that's the beauty of football. Sometimes you just can't replicate that, and that just was a wonderful way to finish the 80s and go into a new decade of football into the 90s with Euro 96. My memories being a black cab driver, Rod Stewart playing football outside Jonathan's with the Scottish boys and girls there. And it was just a wonderful time in this country, Euro 96. And sadly ended in defeat for England and for Southgate and Pierce. I think they'd done a pizza advert, didn't they?
They did. Yes, they did indeed. Yeah, they did. Yeah, you know, it's. I mean, obviously, what you've got going into the 90s is, I mean, the Liverpool Arsenal game is phenomenal. But then, if you factor in other stuff like the impact of Italia 90, Paul Gascoigne's tears. Yeah. Fever Pitch, which kind of starts to Nick Hornby's book, which pulls in kind of the middle classes more into football. The Taylor Report. There's so much in the mix, and I think all of those factors contribute to football changing. So yeah, but certainly from an Arsenal fan's point of view, the decade ended well, and as I say, it does show that actually football. That, you know, thrilling football on TV is a phenomenal communal experience, and as I said, shows TV companies that, you know what, football might just be worth investing a lot of money in, which is exactly what happened with Sky in 1992.
Absolutely, and that Fever Pitch book really was the start of a number of football books and writers writing about their team, certain games, etc., players. I know we've had the biographies and the autobiographies, but it opened up a big avenue, didn't it, to publishers to publish some of the wonderful books that we still continue to see today. And your book proudly, your two books proudly sit up there with the very best. John, how can we buy the book? I went to Waterstones today and bought it. 20 English pounds bought this work of art. Thank you for writing it. I'm absolutely happy, elated to purchase it. But there's going to be another number of people, with Christmas is round the corner, want to get not just Go to War, but your 70s book, Get It On as well.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you like to buy your books. I mean, both are available, of course, on Amazon. Mm-hmm. But if you fancy not handing your money to a billionaire, then you can. I mean, Hive website is a good one. They're quite ethical. I think the price of the book is the same as Amazon. Yeah. But what they do is they give money back to independent bookshops, so you can get it on there. The publisher actually. Bite Back, they've got it on a great offer before Christmas. They're actually selling it for £10 before in the until next Friday. Mm-hmm. So you've got to be quick. And but they've got it on sale there. Or you can do what you did today and go into Waterstones as well. Which one did you go
Merrill.
to?
Merrill.
Right. Yeah,
Birmingham is an absolute nightmare. We've got traffic logs, we've got lights, it's easier to go to Merrill. Free parking, go in there, go into Waterstones, and you can buy the book. And how can people?
It should be in every Waterstones in the country. I'm
certainly
told anyway. And I think the paperback of Go to War, of Get It On is also in pretty much it. I had a little mosey around London a couple of weekends ago, and it was there. Also, I am this weekend at the Stanchion bookstall in Hackney Market, signing copies for anyone who wants them there. Either Go to War, Get It On, or some of my Arsenal books, I believe, are there. So I'll be there at 12:30 this Saturday. Stanchion Books, Hackney Market. That will be going on there. Yeah.
Stanchion are a great group, aren't they? Again,
they are.
Big presence on social media, as you are. What's your, how can people hook up with you and just say, John, I've read the book, absolutely fantastic. When are you going to be writing the 90s book? So when are you going to be writing the 90s book? Have you already started? Have you got a working title? And how long is it going to take you to write it? When's it going to be on sale?
I have. I've only just started it though, and it will be out. It will probably be out. God, now that's kind of get my thinking now. Probably springtime 2027. It'll be a little while. But it's worth taking time on. I've started writing about started on the FA Cup finals of FA Cup semi-finals of 1990. Which between Oldham and Man United and Liverpool and Crystal Palace, which kind of set the scene for what's happening in
Villa Park.
Yeah, and Villa Park, that's right. I'm just sorry, the market I'm at with Stanchion at, I've just checked now, is Broadway Market in Hackney.
Got you.
So it's Broadway Market in Hackney. And you can follow Stanchion they're on Twitter as well, they're on Blue Sky as well. I'm on both of those. So if you want to know any more details, you can contact me there. Or Stanchion. Many of your listeners will follow Stanchion, the football bookshop, Stanchion Books, as you say, they're great as well.
Absolutely. John, can I thank you so much for your time? Thank you for writing these two wonderful pieces of art. And thank you for giving me your time to talk to you about your two books. And we will be talking about your 90s book in maybe 18 months' time or 2 years.
A couple of years. That would be fantastic. Yes.
I want it done in 18 months, mate.
That's what the publishers are saying.
We're all getting a bit old.
I'm not sure I can comply with that, I'm afraid.
We're edging our bets. We're all getting a bit old now.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah,
and we like to read about when we were young.
Yeah. No, the 90s book will be a good one. I can promise you that.
Fantastic. If it's anything like the last two, it's going to be an absolute bestseller. So thanks so much for your time, mate. All the best going forward. Please keep in touch. And guys, thanks for listening and buy John's book.
Thank you, Paul. Cheers.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to talk to you again.
Lovely. Thanks, John. Bye for now.
Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.
Cheers, pal. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
This holiday season, when you can't be there, let 1-800-Flowers.com deliver. At 1-800-Flowers, every gift is crafted with care and designed to make spirits bright. From classic holiday bouquets and unique one-of-a-kind designs to gift bundles you can't find anywhere else, 1-800-Flowers makes it easy to stay connected, no matter the distance. Just a few clicks and your thoughtful gift is on its way. Visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST to deliver joy, beauty, and celebration this holiday season.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Hey guys, 4-time U.S. Soccer Athlete of the Year, Landon Donovan here.
And I'm former U.S. and Premier League star goalkeeper Tim Howard.
And we're here to let you know about our brand new podcast, Unfiltered Soccer.
We'll be providing you with all of our insights into everything happening with the U.S. men's national team as they build towards World Cup 2026 here in North America.
And we'll give you all our thoughts on the latest news from MLS, the English Premier League, international tournaments, La Liga, everything going on in the soccer world and beyond.
And all throughout, Landon and I will be dropping in some of our most memorable stories from both on and off the pitch.
That's right. We'll take you inside the locker rooms, give you all the behind-the-scenes soccer info that you crave. It's our life in soccer, and it's unfiltered.
Subscribe to Unfiltered Soccer on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Make sure you follow us on all your social media platforms at Unfiltered Soccer.
New episodes drop every Tuesday.
And this week's episode is sponsored by The Gig in Acox Green, Birmingham. Our fantastic venue, bar and recording studio. Find them on all social media platforms. Just search for The Gig, Acox Green, Birmingham.